Okay. Today we're going to talk about the first two elements of the contract, which are agreement and consideration. So agreement actually has two parts to it. One is the offer, the other is the acceptance. And the offer is going to be an important element because it sets the terms of the contract. An offer is basically a proposal that was made by one side to the other side. The offeror makes the proposal to the offeree, and in doing so he creates a power of acceptance in the offeree. The contractual nature of that comes about because the offer is this proposal in which there's a serious intent to create a contract to make mutual commitments, and there are reasonably certain indefinite terms to this proposal that is being made. It has to be communicated by the offeror to the offeree. Okay. Now, serious intent may be lacking if the parties are just expressing an opinion or prediction. So if you take your car to a garage and they tell you they can fix it and they're going to fix a certain part, that's a prediction. And what happens if it turns out that they don't actually fix it? They change the part, but that doesn't fix it. Does that constitute an offer and acceptance when you agree to have them change the part? Well, you've accepted the work they've done. Prediction itself is not necessarily, however, going to be part of that thing, so it won't be included in the terms. So what is the contract for is usually to actually fix that part, or remove that part and put a different part in, and that's all they're required to do. The prediction is not part of the offer. It's simply, something that they made to get you to agree to pay for the part that they're going to put in your car. Hopefully that it will change it, and they'll tell you that. Statements of future interests. If you say, in the future I would like to sell you my car, or in the future I'd like to buy your car, either way, basically you're stating a future interest, and that's not going to be part of an offer. Preliminary negotiations are oftentimes discussed. They are not necessarily then part of the offer. The offer has to be looking for a mutual commitment. So if you're just negotiating, discussing terms, you've got to, at some point, one of the other party has to say, okay, this will be our contract. And so somebody has to put these terms into a statement that forms an offer, something that can be expected to be fulfilled, where both sides are committed to something, not just something they're talked about doing. Some agreements to agree are not offers, some are. So you can have an agreement to agree that's an offer, and in that case you're agreeing to make a contract in the future. Advertisements are treated as invitations and are not treated as offers. So you see an advertisement in a paper, except that some advertisements, such as an offer of reward, they do constitute a offer. So if they say there's a reward for the return of my dog Fifi, what they're doing is they're making a unilateral offer, one-sided offer, where the acceptance will be not a promise to return the dog Fifi, but actual return of the dog Fifi. Auctions are also this way. Auctions, basically people bid on it, and the auctioneer is not actually making the offers. The people who bid are making the offers, because the offer has to be complete in its terms, and you don't have the price of the item until somebody makes a bid. Okay. Usual terms. Terms sometimes are expressly stated or inferred if a contract, or in other cases they may be inferred if a contract is to arise. So you either have to expressly state the terms, oftentimes they're a very good ideal to do, but sometimes certain terms might be inferable. So for instance, you want to be stating who the parties are. So both parties are often, maybe if you have a writing, both parties are going to sign their names. And so in making the offer, you might state the names of the parties, or you might leave that for a later insertion with the actual thing. So if you are making the offer by a writing, you're going to need to have some indication of the parties usually. The subject matter usually needs to be indicated. Are you selling a car or are you selling a motorcycle? Consideration to be paid to each party, that is what each party is getting from the deal, that's the consideration. So consideration is what each party gets. We'll talk about consideration more later. So what is each party to get in the contract? The time and place of payment. When payment will be made, and where is it going to be made? You know, is it going to be made when the guy picks it up, or is he going to pay in some sort of installment arrangement? That needs to be stated. Time, place, and quantity of any goods to be delivered or held for delivery. So these are terms that are usually going to be stated. Some of these may be inferable, and if there's been some past dealings in the past, that's one way in which it gets inferred. So there are other things we'll talk about later about terms that can be read into a contract that were not expressly stated. Termination of offers. Now, the offer will remain open until it is one of several things happens. There are certain actions of the party that terminates offers. So one action of the party would be revocation of the offer. The revoking of the offer is done by the offeror. So he was the one who created the offer. He can terminate it by revoking it. The rejection of the offer is what the offeree does, and that terminates the offer also. So either party can terminate the offer. A specific kind of rejection is called a counteroffer, but it's just a kind of a rejection where the party, you know, says, no, I won't. No, I won't pay you $5,000 for that computer. I'll pay you $3,000 for that computer. So you know, basically he's offering you different terms. He may be accepting a lot of your terms, but he might have some terms that makes it a counteroffer. And what happens with a counteroffer is the parties switch sides. So the offeror becomes the offeree. So the offeror is in control of the terms of the contract. By taking control of the contract, the offeree becomes the offeror. Now, other things can happen to terminate an offer. Lapse of time. Offers will not stay open forever. They'll stay open for a reasonable time, or this is one of those terms that you can either state or you can leave it just for, you know, to be inferred. Or they're open for a reasonable time, so you can infer that they'll be open for a reasonable time. Let's say your roommate tells you that he knows you're taking calculus next semester, you'll need a calculus book, and he's got a calculus book, and he'll sell you his calculus book for a good price, and for you to let him know. He doesn't state when you need to tell him or when the offer will terminate, but you know, you can infer that you know when he's leaving, you know, and that you can infer that if you don't tell him before that time, that he will probably take the book over to the bookstore and sell it to the bookstore, in which case you would want to make that acceptance of that offer before that time is up. And if you do it later than that, he could say, well, sorry, that offer terminated. You know, I actually sold it to the bookstore. So whatever's a reasonable term. You know. Destruction of the subject matter would also destroy the offer. So for instance, if you had a discussion with one of your roommates just before class, and he's wanting to sell his motorbike, and you're wanting to buy a motorbike, and you haven't, you know, haven't actually agreed to his terms, but he's made a certain offer for a price of $2,000. He'll sell you his motorbike, and you say, yeah, well, I got to think about it, and then class starts, and you say, well, I'll let you know at the break, and you know, of course, that kind of sets the time for the. It's inferred that the offer will stay open at least till the break. But let's say that at the time of the break, you you accept, but you go out to see the motorbike and you find out that it has been destroyed. Somebody drove over it with a 18-wheel truck, and now it's a piece of junk. Do you have to pay for this piece of junk because of the contract that was created? Well, I think you can argue that before that this happened before you had actually agreed to the terms, and therefore there was no contract that you would have to follow through on, because the subject matter had been destroyed while the offer was still on the table and there had not yet been a contract. So once an offer is accepted, there is a contract and there's no longer an offer. Okay, so another way that an offer will terminate would be where it requires the personal attention or performance by the offeror. Let's say that an artist is going to paint your portrait and he dies. Can you accept the offer? Well, you can't accept the offer. You can't perform it, or maybe he doesn't die. Maybe he actually has a terrible accident and can no longer paint because he's lost his hands or something, and so the offer is terminated by the death or unexpected incompetence of a party. Sometimes that can happen where a party is a professional and he's a dentist and he basically has lost his license, and if that's the case, he can no longer perform the contract. Okay. The last kind of termination by operation of law is the supervening illegality. And so if you've got a contract with a foreign government to deliver arms and the United States government declares an embargo on that country, you cannot deliver arms, it's illegal now, and this is an offer that had been created. You can no longer accept that offer because you can no longer perform the contract, and it's illegal. Okay. Firm offers. I'm sorry. Let's talk first about revocability of offers. Now, offers can be revoked any time before their acceptance, okay? And there are exceptions to that for irrevocable offers. So, for instance, a contract, an option contract creates an irrevocable offer. An option contract, you pay the person to keep it open. So you say, let's say you're a real estate salesperson, and you go to a farmer and you say, I've got a client and he's interested in buying your farm, but I cannot disclose his name. He's not certain he wants to buy it, but if you would agree, I will offer you a certain amount, and you will, he will have the option to actually buy it. And then he maybe pays you some money to keep that offer open. So you say, he says, how much do you want for the option to buy your land? And they tell you the price of the land. He's going to pay you $300,000 for your land, and so you're going to give him a month to consider whether or not he wants to do that. So that's an option contract. That's a contract that keeps open on offer for another contract. And at the end of the month, he either has to follow through and accept the offer. If he doesn't, it ends. And oftentimes you would want some sort of money to keep that offer open. And so you might say, okay, I'll sell you an option for that for $1,000. Now, what happens if he accepts the offer? Do you still get to keep the option money, or does that get rolled into the contract? It depends upon how the offer was made and accepted, because like I said, it's a separate contract. So the option is a contract in and of itself. And the amount of money that's being paid and the time and whether or not one gets to keep it if there's an acceptance is all negotiable. How much money is there any limited amount of money? We don't get into the adequacy, as we'll see when we talk about consideration. We don't get into the adequacy of consideration. So this would be consideration for the offer. How much do you need to put up? It kind of depends upon whether the parties agree upon, and the courts will not question what they have actually agreed to. They're presumed to know what it agreed to, except in cases where there's an alleged fraud or not. Also, there are firm offers. Firm offers are offers that the other party says are irrevocable, and so he says that he's going to hold it open to you for certain reasons. So that's a firm offer. So firm offer requirements. The firm offers can only be made by a merchant. They must be in writing, must be signed by the merchant or his agent, cannot exceed 3 months or 90 days. Okay. Promissory estoppel. If the offer induces or requires a material change on the offeree's part prior to the acceptance, then you're going to be stopped from terminating the offer. So if for instance, you tell a person that you want him to paint your house, and he needs to come on Saturday to do that, and it's Thursday, and let's say he goes out and he buys the paint that he's going to put into your house, can you terminate the offer? Well, he's made a commitment to maybe other painters to come and do the work also, and he tells you, I've got to go out and hire some men to get it done in the time that you want me to do it. I'll need to go hire some people. He's gone out and he's hired these people, and they're expecting to get paid. They show up on Saturday. Can you at that time say, sorry, I'm terminating my offer? You can't. You will be promissorily stopped because there's been a change, a significant change. He's made commitment to these men. He has to pay them, so you need to go through with the contract or pay damages. It's promissory estoppel. A court might find detrimental reliance. So you basically, the ideal that there are these other men that are relying upon the contract, and this guy, that means it's a detrimental reliance on the part of the painter to these other men who he's hired to do the work, and therefore refuse the offeree a power to revoke or withdraw at a certain point. And so definitely if you wait till Saturday, you would probably be stopped from being able to terminate the offer at that time. Partial performance. A unilateral offer, and a unilateral contract, you'll remember, is basically one where a party does some work and then gets paid. So the acceptance is doing the work. You hired a kid down the street to cut your grass for $50, and he shows up on Saturday to do it, and he starts cutting the grass. He gets the front yard cut. You go out and you say, I'm sorry, I'm going to terminate the offer, and I'm not going to pay you because you didn't complete your acceptance. You know, you have to. The work was, I was paying you $50 to completely cut all my grass, but I'm terminating the offer and you didn't complete it in time. You can't do that. So the courts have held that if the offeree's actions are of a material, substantial nature, the offeror has to allow the offeree to complete the task. And so that's a relatively understandable kind of thing. Now we'll begin to talk about acceptance. Acceptance is a voluntary communication by word or conduct by offeree to offeror to indicate his assent to terms. Silence will not usually constitute acceptance. The acceptance must be unequivocal and also consistent with the terms of the offer. If the offeree changes the terms of the proposed offer, he creates a counteroffer. We talked about that before. So that's what acceptance is. So both the offer and the acceptance have to be voluntary acts on the part of the parties. So a contract is only created by voluntary actions of parties agreeing to enter into a contract. Silence will not usually constitute the acceptance, as said. When will silence actually constitute an acceptance? Well, sometimes there might be a duty to speak out arise if the party is benefited by the actions of the other party and knows the other party expects to be paid. And so if you cause somebody to take actions and you know, you didn't actually, you allow him to go ahead with it, and then you know, there may be a duty at some point to speak up and say, no, we're not going to do that. Prior dealings in which silence was an acceptance would be included in this category. So if if for instance he's been sending you notices that, let's say every year at Christmas time, your club sells Christmas trees, and every year it works that you send a message to the tree farm, and they just ship the trees. And this year they don't do that. Have they broken a contract? Well, maybe if there was a duty to speak out. If the judge finds that there was a duty for them to speak out and say, no, we're not going to deliver the trees, therefore allowing you to maybe make other arrangements, then that needs to be done. Solicitation of offers may create a duty to tell the offeror whether the offer is acceptable. So if you are soliciting offers, you usually will oftentimes say what is required for an offer to be acceptable. Does a man need to be experienced? You want to hire somebody to fix your house. When I hire people to work on my house, maybe to put in cabinets or do other work, I will want them to actually be people who are working in the area and have worked in the area. So how long have they worked in this particular neighborhood? How long have they been, can I expect them? If they actually have a home, that will be a plus. I want to make sure that they're there. So there's certain things. I'm not interested in hiring a person who's fly-by-night, who's only just starting. I want to make sure they've got experience and that they've been working in the area for a while, so that they have a reputation I can check out. And so that's, you can require certain things of it. Communication of acceptance. Ordinarily, a bilateral offer requires the offeree to communicate a promise to the offeror as acceptance. Ordinarily, a unilateral offer requires the offeree to fully perform an act as acceptance. Usually, no communication is necessary. So, that is the offeree is not required to communicate his acceptance. Basically, if you've had the boy, he's been cutting grass, and you tell him, hey, come down Saturday to cut the grass, and he doesn't communicate back with you, and he shows up on Saturday to cut the grass, you cannot at that point say, well, we didn't have a contract, because you actually induced that kind of a contract there. Rejection or revocation. Rejection by the offeree is effective when received by the offeror. So rejection is effective when received. Revocation of the offeror to the offeree is effective when received by the offeree. So in both those cases, those work when they do. Now at the common law and in this country, face-to-face communications, acceptance of an offer is sometimes effective if the rule of the court or state is that they're following the mailbox rule. The mailbox rule, like common law, a letter deposited in the mailbox would create an immediate acceptance when sent, not when accepted, so not when received. And so basically the rule for an acceptance put in the mail is different than the other rules on revocation or revocation, And so this on acceptance here, England no longer follows this rule. It is still the law in many U.S. States, and no other country follows this rule. And in international deals, an acceptance is only effective when received. Okay. Authorized means. In order for an acceptance to be effective, it has to be an authorized means. So express authorization exists when the offeror has stipulated in the offer how it may be accepted. So you might say acceptance must be by mail, or the acceptance has to be in person, in which case he stipulated how it is to be delivered. On the other hand, there's implied authorization arises when facts or circumstances existing suggest that certain means of communication are expected. So if you're talking face-to-face, oftentimes face-to-face, the acceptance can be made face-to-face at the time during the negotiations. Or of course, somebody could stipulate otherwise in a face-to-face dealing. If you received an offer in the mail, it's usually inferred that you could accept that offer by mailing back your acceptance, especially if they sent you an acceptance form in an envelope to send it in. So that's easy enough to understand. Counteroffers. With counteroffers, the mirror image rule was oftentimes invoked, and that held that any addition or change to an offer creates a counteroffer. So if you change any part of it, it would be a counteroffer. This is no longer the rule under the UCC. So Uniform Commercial Code, which deals in sale of goods, has modified this rule now. In most cases, the change or addition will be presumed to be a non-binding request for an accommodation. So you send away to purchase for sale in your store, you're selling calculators, and you send away to buy a certain calculator for students who will be coming in to buy it for school. And last year they had one calculator, and now they've updated it and it's got a new model number. You order the calculator with the old model number, and they send you the one that's the new one with the new thing, and they send a little letter saying this is the model so and so and so. We no longer are selling that other model that you ordered, but this is the one that's the same as it, except it has some changes. Instead of having all metal parts, this one has some plastic parts. And we're sending you this as an accommodation. And so the offeree can clearly reject the deal, but if he doesn't, quickly, promptly indicate that it's unacceptable, he'll be held that it is contract. So, and so you should, if it's reasonable, he should probably accept it. A counteroffer requires an unequivocal and clear rejection of the terms or terms of the offer. Okay. Consideration has to be discussed. So this is the second element we were discussing, and the agreement and the consideration together constitute the process of creating an agreement. The other elements are just things that disqualify an agreement. We'll see them later. But for this, for now, a consideration is a bargain for exchange of either legal benefit or legal detriment. A legal benefit is something that you get that's a benefit. So if I agree and you agree to sell me a car, I buy a car from you, and I get a car and you get the money that I pay, both of us are receiving a benefit. On the other time, sometimes you might bargain for a legal detriment. So I tell you that although I know that you want to play your radio at noon every day and you play it loudly, and or at least I say it's loud, you say it's not loud, and that you have a right to do that, and I know that the landlord won't stop you from doing it as long as it's at noon, but I'm sleeping at noon and I want to do that, and I say if you will refrain from doing that, I will pay you $20 every day that you refrain from doing that. That may be too much money, but if I bargain for that, that's fine. So that would be bargaining for a legal detriment. You're giving up some right at my request, and I'm paying you for it. So it's a legal detriment that I'm bargaining to get. So it's a bargaining exchange of either a legal benefit or a legal detriment. That's what consideration is. If the party freely and purposely bargain for the exchange, then whatever he obtains by the bargain is presumably of equal value to that which he has given. So if I'm willing to pay you $20, it must be worth it for me to pay you $20 for that legal detriment that you're giving up. And at least in my estimation, it would be such. And I can't dispute that because I was willing to do that. I freely and voluntarily agreed to that. So legal value, that's a question of legal value. A promise to do that which the promisor is not otherwise obligated to do would be of legal value. So, a promise to cut my grass would be obviously valuable to me for a person. He's not obligated to do that, except I get him to do it by maybe promising him some money. The actual performance of some act which one is not obligated to perform, that is to refrain from playing the radio, that actually is something that has legal value. Forbearance, that's what that is. Forbearance is of legal value. Bargain for distinguishes a contractual promise from a promise of a gift. So you don't negotiate usually over promises of a gift. Each side must give something or refrain from something at the request of the other, and each side therefore has some inducement. So there's a famous case involving an uncle and a nephew. The uncle has said to his nephew, if the nephew changes his evil ways, that is, that if he goes to church on Sunday regularly with his mother, and he comes in at reasonable hours at night, and he refrains from drinking, that evil liquor that he's been drinking, and if he refrains from using cuss words and lives a good Christian life, the uncle promises that on his next birthday, the uncle will buy him a $500 car, a new Model T. This is an actual case from 1910. And the uncle made this promise that he was going to give them this as a gift, he called it. The nephew, however, felt that it was actually a contract. And so when the uncle didn't give the gift on his birthday, and when the uncle said, oh, well, continue to do as you're doing and I will eventually buy you that car, he sued the uncle, and the court said, yes, this was a contractual gift. He had given up all those things. That was a legal detriment, right? And therefore you have to pay him by giving him what you promised him. So you have to give the consideration that he bargained for, that you bargained for with him. Each side must give something up and refrain something at the request of the other, and each side therefore has some inducement. So you induce him to enter into the contract by promising him what you called a gift. It turned out it wasn't a gift at all, but it was consideration. Adequacy. One of the parties receives inadequate consideration if what he receives is in the eyes of others of lesser value than what he gave. That it's a lopsided exchange. I once bought a sand sculpture. It was a jar which was filled up with sand, and if you looked at the jar, it looked like a scene at the beach. And I brought it home, and my mother said, that's a piece of junk. How much did you pay for that? And I said, this much. She said, take it back. It's not worth that. That's a contract. If I enter into a contract, actually in this case, she actually prepared it for me. It was a contract, so she did this work, and I paid her for it when it was done. It's a contract, and I can't get out of that contract. I can't say, well, it's inadequate. I bargained for it, and therefore, since she produced what I asked her to produce, I'm required to pay for it. In contract law, we do not second guess the bargains that others have made. Now, by the way, on that one, I could have made the promise that if she prepared a scene like that, to my satisfaction, I would buy it. In that case, the satisfaction becomes part of the bargain. So that's arguably not a contract then, right? Because maybe I'm not committed because I can do that. But if I set some standard as to what would be satisfactory, if George says that it's a good sculpture, then I'll pay for it. If I set some outside standard of some sort that we can look at and determine whether it meets the standard, then it would be a contract. Juries or jurors may consider the unfairness of a contract in determining if there was fraud or duress or undue influence. So adequacy might go to a question of whether or not there was fraud or duress. It might be admitted as evidence of that, in which case the court is not saying that the contract had inadequate consideration, except that the contract was fraud, and the fact that so little money was received is some evidence that there was a fraud involved. Or maybe there was a misrepresentation of the value of the work that was to be done, and that was maybe fraud. Sufficiency. The following are held not to be sufficient consideration. Pre-existing duty. So pre-existing duty is an obligation to perform something that you have before you negotiate something. So for instance, if you are a bounty hunter and I am a farmer who has had a number of my sheep attacked by a wolf, and I know you're the bounty hunter for the county, and I say, look, if you get this particular wolf, I want you to go out and hunt for this particular wolf. Spend a lot of time. Spend your time looking for this particular wolf. He's been eating my sheep. And if you do that, I'm going to give you a reward on top of what you're receiving from the county as a party who's being paid to do this. There's a pre-existing duty for him to do that, and therefore whether I have to give him that extra reward depends upon how the court rules on it, whether that pre-existing duty eliminated the need for me to do that, or whether it was possible. Can he actually accept rewards in a situation like that? And maybe by hunting for this particular varmint, this particular wolf, he's neglecting other chances to catch other wolves who are bothering other farmers, and therefore we want him not to do that. We want him to catch the wolves, as many as he can, and not to favor any particular farmer in looking for wolves. So maybe we're going to rule in that case that there was a pre-existing duty for him to capture wolves, and he cannot take money, extra money for doing it because it will pervert his duty. He will be maybe distracted from doing it in the most efficient way. So that's a pre-existing duty rule. It also exists whenever you already have a duty to pay for something like your utility bill. The electricity company sends you this, you go in and you begin to negotiate over the bill that they sent you, but you already received the electricity, and under the previous contract you were obligated to pay for it. There was a pre-existing duty. So there has to be some dispute as to the bill in order to negotiate a different payment, and you usually can't do that. You cannot like send them a check for less than the amount and write at the bottom, payment in full, because it's not payment in full, and the fact that they cash that check will not represent any sort of settlement. Okay, so past consideration is another kind of thing that has is not sufficient consideration. So if you paid them in the past for something, and you see a person stranded on the road, and you stop to help them fix their tire, and the lady in the car says, "Oh, thank you." After you do it, she didn't promise you anything before you did it. She said, "Thank you for doing it. I'm going to send you $20." Is that a contract, or is that a gift? That's a gift at that point because she was not obligated. The contract wasn't existed. You did the consideration, and then she makes a promise to send you money. It's a gift. It's not a bargaining for situation. Love or affection. Your daughter is crying at her house. You come to see her and she's sitting at her table. She's crying, and you say, "What's wrong?" She tells you that her husband has lost his job and she's afraid they're going to lose the house because she can't make the mortgage payment. And so you promise her that you will make the mortgage payment as long as he's out of work, which is fine. The first mortgage payment, you make it. The second mortgage payment, after the promise, you make that. Then you die. You didn't make the third mortgage payment. She goes to her brother, who's executor of the estate, and she wants him to pay it because father had promised to do it. And therefore you argue that it's a contract. And what supports the contract? Well, your father's love. That's it. Well, that will not support a contract, so there's no contract there, and you can't do it as executor. Under the court rules, he should keep the money until the whole thing gets settled, so you won't get any money until it's all settled. Maybe you need to go talk to the landlord or to the bank that has the mortgage and see if they'll give you an extension. Moral obligation will also not constitute consideration. It's not sufficient consideration. A man's going down an alley, and another man up above is throwing wood into a wagon. And the man going down the alley is passing through in a way that he's going to be hit by the blocks of wood that are being thrown. Well, the man who's throwing the wood out there sees him and tries to pull back and keep the wood from falling on the man. But he stumbles and falls out of the building himself onto 2 floors down into the alley and injures himself. Is taken to the hospital. So the guy who he saved feels bad about it and goes to see him in the hospital, and he promises to pay him for to pay his bills for the accident. Is he obligated to do that? He's not morally obligated. That moral obligation doesn't constitute consideration. However, of course, he might be sued for negligence in that case, but not if the fellow who was passing through the alley was negligent because he ignored signs not to trespass. So, a moral obligation, if he feels there is a moral obligation, is not adequate. You can sue him for negligence, though, right? Because the man passing through the alley was negligent by ignoring the signs, no trespassers. There are exceptions to the pre-existing duty rule, and so you cannot, the reason for the rule is you cannot use the threat to stop doing what you promise in order to renegotiate the contract in a more favorable way. So if you were to, say, hired to put in cabinets in somebody's kitchen, and you come in there and you say, it's going to take me more time than I thought, and therefore I want more money for doing this. But you had agreed ahead of time, can you use that threat to stop working to get it? And the answer is no. However, the courts may make an exception in cases of extraordinary difficulties not foreseeable at the time of contracting, or where the parties have in good faith rescinded the old contract and freely agreed to a new one. So it has to be a voluntary agreement, not one that's kind of been extorted by the guys threatening to walk out. So this exception is to the pre-existing duty rule for situations in which there's some extraordinary difficulty not foreseeable at the time of contracting. So this sometimes happens. It might happen there. Maybe there's a huge rock, and the guy's supposed to be building a basement for a house for you, and he says, "Well, there's this huge rock. We weren't anticipating that. It's extraordinary." Perhaps the court might find that's true, and therefore he should be given extra money because of the situation he's in. But these would be rare exceptions. Accord and satisfaction is simply what we call it when a party agrees to accept less than what was agreed to ahead of time. There usually has to be, for that to be a legal contract, there usually has to be a dispute as to what the amount owed was. And that may arise if the work is a matter of question about whether or not the work was up to a standard, and therefore you want to pay him less because you're saying the work isn't worth what he was charging you for. And if you had in there that he had to do it to satisfaction, he did some work, but it's not satisfactory. He's a painter, and there are certain things wrong with some of the walls. Some of the walls are okay, others are going to need to be repainted, and you don't want him to do it because he already screwed up on some of this work anyway, so you're hiring a different person. And so you're going to pay him for some of what he did because some of the work was acceptable and some of it isn't. So you're renegotiating it, and you can enter into then an accord and satisfaction on that regard. Settlement or release. If the amount owed is unknown or in dispute or subject to a lawsuit, then signing of a release with receipt of payment or promise of payment may constitute a legal settlement of the debt. A release requires, one, that it has to be negotiated in good faith, so it's not being used to extort. Two, it has to be a signed written statement. And three, there must be consideration. There are certain promises that are enforceable without consideration. Promises to pay the debt barred by a statute of limitation. Okay, states require you to have it in writing if you're going to do that. Promissory estoppel requires detrimental reliance. Charitable subscriptions may be based on public policy or detrimental reliance. So now, the one thing I want to add to this is that if you've had a debt discharged in bankruptcy, the only way that you can accept or demand payment from the other party who was declared bankrupt and released from the debt that he owed you would be good to go to the judge and have the debt reinstated. And the judges are reluctant to do that. You know, you should have had that reinstatement done before the discharge was made. They want to leave the decisions intact. Promissory estoppel. This is where there's an equitable remedy requires a clear and definite promise was made, and the promisee must justifiably and detrimentally rely on the promise. Reliance of a substantial and definite character. Unjust enrichment, that is, justice will be better served by enforcing the promise. So some party tells you that he could fix your dog, he could attempt to cure him, but he can't be sure he will actually be able to do so. And you know, you say, well, gee, I want it done. And he said, well, I can promise you, I can do this, and it might cure him, but we can't be sure. And so you agree to do it. So, and he's detrimentally relying. He's taking his time. He's actually spending the time to do the work on it. You cannot just get out of it by saying that well, it didn't work, and he thought it was going to work. Okay. So one example of this is a promise of employment. You get into these situations where, let's say a chef is particularly good and he's working in a restaurant, and the employment somebody comes to see you and says, I got a restaurant, you're very good, and I would like to hire you in my restaurant, and I'll pay you more than what you're getting paid here. And you can quit at any time because you're an employee at will. And so you agree to go to work for this other party, and he's going to pay you a certain amount. So you tell your boss that you are quitting, and you go over and work for the other guy. But when you get your paycheck, he's not paying you even as much as the other person paid. He's paying you less than you received before. Can you get the higher amount? Yes, you can, if you can prove that he made a promise to pay you the higher amount, and you relied upon it by quitting your job, even if he could argue that there was not a contract, which might be another total issue. And so resignation is seen to be both reasonable and detrimental reliance in that kind of cases. So it's a case that fits into the promissory estoppel kind of situation, that you cannot deny the contract if he quit it to receive higher pay, which you had promised him, even if there's some difficulty in establishing offer and acceptance. Yeah, that's